I would like to thank everybody, first of all. It's been a very productive, but a bit of a slog, but a very productive one. And again, our thanks to Grace and to Brett and to sort of the unnamed people here, like T on the front desk, and Gary. Can we give them a hand? Thanks. Now, what I'd like to suggest is I think there are certain themes that sort of have come in and out. Yael, you don't want to come up? No. No. Okay, certain theme. Andrea? Ben? No. Okay, it's a very large round table. Just think of it this way. The whole room is a big table. One of the things that Daniel and Andy and I were trying to do when we were putting together this, the grant and then the book and so on, was to really allow photography or help or enable this thing called photography to think itself differently or make itself differently. And I think we've succeeded on that particular score. We, meaning all of us here. So some of the themes that came out, obviously there were questions around scale, the things that were today, scale and tagging I thought was quite interesting that was brought up, the whole question of the uncanny, the ways in which memory is artificial or not artificial, can be changed, can be mutated, the work in terms of what does it mean to have real photography, not real, and so on. All of these kind of questions were sort of rubbing shoulders within different epistemological systems, different artistic inroads. So I throw it open to everybody. If you can think of a burning axis, I'd just like to, before I throw that wide open, I also think it's been very interesting with the Twitter. Normally Twitter irritates me, obviously coming from a different world, but I've kind of found it interesting this time. It was almost like being in with a bunch of school kids that were passing notes, but you were kind of all in on the thing, and where I came from, I used to be the butt of the jokes, because I had very bad teeth or, whatever. So, they'd be passing a note, you'd get it, you go, oh, that's not so good. That was me. And instead, what's happening is everybody can kind of see what's going on, and I kind of like that. I thought it was actually quite interesting, and some of the jokes and some of the irritations and the way in which you had to be irritated within like 140 characters. I thought that was also kind of interesting. So that was a whole nother thing that was going on, and also the way in which the artworks communicated. They started jumping in every now and then. I thought that Hannah's piece on the lesbian Grey's Anatomy interpretation thing was quite interesting, how they kept intersecting into this room when people were talking about peeling away and looking at skeletons. And of course all the paintings, and I don't want to go through all the work again, and the glitter and so on that's shown up. But I just also want to again thank the artists that have come in and brought their work to us, Julie Wem's piece and Sheena's pieces and so on. So is there a burning 1 or 2 or 7, let's say, themes? Notice that's how many we had in our panels, but anyway, that might have come to light for you. Yes. See, Estelle, I knew it.
Well, I have to say something.
Okay.
I think for me...
Wait. Thanks, Mark.
For me, because we've just come back from the New Materialisms Conference in Helsinki, and it's an area that I've been interested in for a long time. I work with Christopher, who I consider to be quite a radical materialist. But the insights for me that I got from photography was that we're still playing across these issues of the difference or the gap between the real and the representational. And I think photography is really interesting because it has this indexical, this sort of bridge, which I thought, somehow the indexical allows us to conceive of an image that has some causal relation to the referent. But then what we had with Danny, is that...
you mean Daniel? He doesn't go by Danny. Yeah. He did it only when he was a child.
What we had was...
and in fact, he didn't do it when he was a child either.
The emergence again of the sacred, the invisible, that part which somehow we cannot access. And then this marvelous darkroom image that that we had from our host,
Johnny.
very well. So I suppose for me, the same old boring questions come back to us. You know, the questions of can we ever access the real, and is the real real? That transcendence, is it sacred, some sort of spirituality, or is it brute materiality, or is it something else, or is it an ontology of the social in relation to that something else? So I think those questions for me keep turning around. And then just one more thing that struck me is this notion of violence. And so I came up with 3 definitions of violence that occurred to me during this conference. One was the idea that when we're in that zone of the dark room, we've lost our subjectivity, and therefore the subject has been murdered. There is a violence of the subject as separate from the object. So that's one kind of violence. The other kind of violence that emerged from this morning, I think, was that violence is the gap between our expectations and what really happens. That when something happens that we don't expect, then there is a violence. Again, we somehow seem to be jolted out of our subjective control of ourselves. And then the third one was the idea of violence as a displacement and a subtraction that we got from those images of the newspaper images this morning, of violence of hiding the truth or trying somehow to subtract in order to open up a window into some other reality. So they were the things that really struck me, and they still leave me with this sort of kind of metaphysical question of what is the relationship between the representation, the real. And so that was really all.
Great, thank you. Who else would like to jump in?
I want to jump
Danny wants to.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. So yeah, well, one thing that kind of became quite, I think, urgent for me to say is that it becomes clear that photography does not have a history. And can people please stop talking about the history of photography? Because it's just like saying that the speed of light has a history. Now, granted, there is a history to the discovery of the speed of light. So if you insist, you can talk about the various histories of the uses of photography. But history, despite appearances, is a rationalist project, and photography is not. So I just find it very confusing. And it would be better to find a different, ahistorical way to talk about photography.
Yes, I want to just echo that by saying that I think one of the reasons you also, another murder, also want to kill the notion of history in that sense is that I think the reason people cling on to it is that it gives a sort of a false sense of the political. And the political is not found in looking at the history of X, Y, and Z in that sense. So I just want to echo that, and also just to come back on what Estelle was saying on the dark room and it's not so much that the subject is murdered or the object is murdered or that it dies or something. It's that it's not relevant. It's not about that, and so that's kind of important to understand the way, or to not even to understand, but to have an empathy, because I really want to get people to start thinking in terms of senses. And that it's not really this division between the mind, the cogito in the mind sense, and the senses in the body sense. But in fact that there's this intertwining, and that one can think with their ears. And I started thinking about this darkroom question, not because it was just meant to be some kind of, I don't know, what am I doing here, but rather I was saying, what do I actually do when I sit to compose? What actually happens? And what actually happened was it didn't sit there going, well, let's see, I'm going to have in the fifth bar this, or I'm going to have in, it doesn't work like that. It's something else happens. And this something else I wanted to call this total form of seduction, which I found a companion in Jean-Luc Nancy's work, but he went short, or he didn't go as far as I wanted him to go with it. because he kept hanging on to these ways in which you have to be here and then you get drawn in. This kind of, but literally, what happens when there isn't the limits? And then and that's what I was trying to draw it out. And then it dawned on me, partly because I've been working on this project for so long, that photography as the kind of, I don't know, mouthpiece of the image was the corrupter. It is that thing that goes like that, and that's why to talk about it in terms of a history doesn't help, because it keeps obfuscating the corruptive notion, or the corruptive aspect of what happens when you get pulled in. And it just, I try to take pictures, or whatever. I try, in the classical sense of, and they just never look good. It's just incredible. I mean, I think, wow, this is really terrible. But yours somehow come out better than mine, let me tell you. Mine really wouldn't work, not even as a found object, You couldn't take it and stick it somewhere, just, It really, and that made me think there's something that works in it. That there's some sense of this sensuousness that collides with itself that doesn't do it when I take it, somehow, And so that's what made me start thinking about how does that actually work?
But actually taking a photograph like that isn't, I take very few actual photographs that I would consider to be my work.
Microphone.
And I take very few photographs that I actually would consider to be my work, and I work very slowly over quite a long time. And the image suspension I showed you is the only one from the training gym, and I was there over 18 months. It's the only one I used.
Yeah.
But taking photographs on I had a digital snappy camera, and I take lots of kind of documents that I need for things for research, but they're usually really crap, and I'm not very good at taking pictures of my friends, or I haven't got any nice pictures of myself to put on Facebook.
Yeah.
So I think there is something about taking photographs, and actually maybe some of the photographs you look at as contemporary photography are actually, they're not the kind of pictures that you just take like that. You kind of spend a long time thinking about things, and you make something, and then you choose maybe how you make it, or you set up a structure where you can actually go and wait for that chance thing that interrupts something you've set up that is the thing you're looking for. But that's actually a really different process to actually just taking a photograph.
Yeah,
so
no, I just meant that in this famous dark room, like the sex clubs I was talking about, or the labs or whatever, that in these places there still is also some kind of expertise that one calls on. There is a trained eye, or whatever you want to call it, trained hand, trained something. What I did last night in terms of writing is not easy to do, and not everybody in this room could do it. I say that with love. I'm not trying to sound immodest or something. There is a training to this, just like there's a training to what you're doing. And so it's just that you don't just get sucked into some dark room and go, wow, this is kind of amazing, and now I'm going to be really, really fantastic at whatever I'm doing here. It doesn't work like that. So it's not like there's an intellectual rationality, but there is something that I don't know, training. I search for the words. This is why I go back to Foucault a lot, because he does talk about this, the question of the self-to-self training and what it really means to learn how to walk and learn how to exercise, and the learning aspect of that. But anyway,
is it the practice rather than the training?
Discipline.
Discipline and the practice of doing it and doing it and doing it.
Yeah, well, there was Mark, and then, wait, there's two Marks. Okay, there's Mark there, and then Mark there.
Hi. I was wondering if your expertise and your training couldn't be itself history, and not the history, a kind of narrative history. I think the history that Daniel's talking about, but the history which is a kind of experience.
Yes, absolutely.
Which wouldn't immediately take the discourse as it's it's not taking the text. It's more taking your position.
I wouldn't call it history, to be honest. I would probably call it the political. I'm probably too much of a political animal to want to call it history in that sense.
And I'm too much of a German to call it not history.
It's all right. It's okay. We've forgiven you a long time ago, so don't worry about it. Mark, do you want to say something?
Yeah, and just to be the sort of second person, forgive me for defending the historical or historiographic thought, but by my own admission, I don't come to. I'm sort of an outsider from philosophy of photography in and of itself, and so I think historiographic thought, one of the things that it does is denaturalizes the medium, right? And so the idea that there are many conversations about the sort of the coming to bear of the digital, right? Whether it's in photography or in film or in my field, communication studies, right? And there are particular objects on which, right, this debate lands, like the image, right, or information, etc. And what the historiographical does is it kind of gives you this distancing position to say, well, yes, photography is a corrupter of sorts, but the position of corrupter is not unique to photography. That there are particular corruptors, right? That these ruptures or disjunctures, as Foucault would call it, happen again and again.
See, I think Daniel's position, not to speak for Daniel, but I think he's saying that the image is.
Well, can I just respond? I think because what I found very interesting in your presentation, you said technology is not human doing. Technology is pre-human. In a sense, technology for that reason is outside of history. And photography for that reason is also outside of history. And saying that the moment you start talking about history of photography without kind of taking that as your default position, you immediately forget precisely your insight.
Sure. Well, I want to preface this by saying that there's a particular discipline of historiographic thought that I am talking about, which is non-teleological, right, non-human, anti-anthropocentric, like all of these things, right, in the way that Foucault or Benjamin or, right, people that would take that up. And I freely admit that there's something called historical time that is a very modernist notion of, right, of how events get organized. But, I mean, I think I agree with Foucault that there's a historical a priori, like that there is something that gets laid bare, right, by looking towards the past, right, or looking to particular events.
I think he intended it ironically.
I'm not well.
Cat amongst the pigeons. Now,
Let's
let's just get a couple more of you. Okay, Estelle? I mean, Barb?
Estelle,
I'm sorry. I love you both.
I guess that I just wanted some themes that came to me sitting today. I think I start with Dean's comment yesterday. In a sense, a task of photography to make our relations to the world painful again. And I see that very much as an antidote of the false consciousness of social media from yesterday, a false past as in the Instagram, the imaginary future as in the digital archive. And to me, that some of the key words that came out yesterday were things like the life-threatening journey, eviscerating attacks, rough edges, deracination, and that in fact the task for photography now, I think, is to tear out of place. That's all I want to say.
Yeah. Andy?
Perhaps it's no surprise that I fundamentally disagree about the claim that photography is not historical. I mean, I don't. It doesn't appear to me. I think there are concepts of history and there are concepts of history. Basically, I can't help but understand photography through looking at it, through thinking about its various different forms. That introduces its complexity, multifaceted character, and the changes and shifts. And then I'm presented with a dilemma as to whether, and I don't know the answer to this dilemma, whether that takes precedent in thinking about photography, the shifts and changes of its context, uses, techniques, and formats, or whether, as in John's presentation, whether it is the fact of all of those differences and their orientation towards the production of the image. I guess in thinking, I would tend to hover between the two, and that would appear to be, given the various different positions sketched out, that would appear to be something that's accepted here as untenable. But yeah, I mean, and that arises from what I take to be, the nearest I can get to thinking about the complexity of photography in in terms of a category, and that is it is a historical technical form, but that is a very strange thing to my mind to actually say. That then, because I buy a lot of the descriptions and a lot of your thought about that the strangeness, the inhumanness, the externality of technology, but then it's the paradox that presents to me is that it is also historical. So I guess.
Yeah.
That is, I just wanted to say history doesn't belong to us either, right? Just as if photography is this object that is not, right? So in that sense, that's the sense of the historical archive. There are empirical, right, phenomena or events that happen, whether we have access to them or not. I mean, that's just laying my cards out to, right? And speaking to what you brought up about the sort of the larger debate about social construction versus realism, and I think part of why this is so exciting to me, this conference, is because there's a push towards realism again. And anyway. So.
But it's not speculative realism. I just want to be very clear about that.
No.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by realism? Are you using the word realism?
I would use it the way Deleuze uses it. I would use it the way that Delenda picks it up.
And how would you, just for the record,
You
how would you?
don't know those references.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just wondering what
Well,
that
that there are things that have value to us, right? Like an ontology of things, right? That there are things that have value to us, whether we value them or not. There are things that communicate with us, whether we know that they're communicating with us, or whether we have a language to talk about that. So I'm talking about non-semantic language, right? Non-semantic affective language.
And
Things
is that what you're calling the a priori historical, the historical a priori?
Yeah, because things that emerge with reality, right? And just because history has been done in a particular way for a few hundred years does not mean that the historical is wrong or false or right. And so this is where my thought is going, is that behaviorism was awful in a particular way and led to some awful things. But the emergence of behaviorist thought escapes the grasp and intention of those people that were using it, right? That's sort of the type of realism that I'm talking about. So photographic theory has a particular realism, whether we're grasping and struggling to figure out what that is.
Yeah, Kristen, listen.
I just wanted to, I think what I might think about the whole idea of realism and the real and reality is about that bringing it back into discussion about photography and about media and about the way we look at images as the political and perhaps as the historical and the political. If we're looking at images that are produced every day, on our televisions, on the internet, in the newspapers, they are kind of presented as reality, as the real, realistic, the truth. And that's where we should be having the debate, because I think sometimes that's neglected a little bit. We're kind of being bombarded with images. There was something about taking photographs in galleries. We're not looking, we're not debating, we're not thinking about it. So we should be thinking about reality, realism as the political and where that's coming from, so it does become historical as well.
Yeah, I'm with you.
For what is being said, I think
Really speak up, 'cause I can't hear you.
for what it has been said over the 2 days, I think that the question might be put more in general like this. It seems to me photography is particularly relevant for contemporary philosophy, for contemporary questioning, and not because the two phenomena are contemporary, happen in the same century. Something else is there. And somehow what you were just saying about having
You being Mark.
no
You being
Kirsten.
sorry about the attention to reality or to the real is precisely because the possibility of making images, whichever way. And it's actually quite important to say making or taking pictures, because in English one says taking pictures. In other languages one makes a photograph, not doesn't take a photograph. So already there is a frame of mind that is in action there. But highlights, the possibility of making or taking pictures, highlights the fact that thought makes or takes pictures. And now there is this device that does it, and it's almost tangible. So it's somehow, photography is a mirror of something that was already happening. And it's not an answer I'm giving, but it seems to me that this is the knot that should be opened up.
Can it be the difference between the history of individual experience, which is in relation to the material, then generalized out as an art practice, as opposed to the reality of this global history of mechanized image making that has no self-relation, that is not particularized, but that is forced back onto every particular person as their experience produces, not, you know what I'm saying, as the truth. Because the truth really is the history of your individual experience. That to me is what the truth is. One's individual, the history of one's individual experience as an artist, in particular, actually intervening in the general.
See, it does raise all these questions about, what's really the true truth or something, if someone does something, if I didn't experience it, it doesn't mean it's any less true. So, I mean, it brings in all those, really, long discussions about that. I think what the issue comes down to, at least on, let's say, on a theoretical level, I'm not going to use the P word, theoretical level, I think what it comes down to is when one tries to place what the horrors that are happening in this world. I thought Yael's talk was so important about how tagging operates. This was very quiet. In fact, the whole talk was very quiet, but it was like one of these laser talks. It was just really quiet. And the thing is that there's a lot of horrible things going on in the world, and one's trying to figure out how to deal with it. How to deal with it as artists, as philosophers, as whatever. And to me, there have been, let's say, ways into the picture, a big one called dialectical materialism, which has really helped in a big way to understand oppression. However, there's a big problem with the way in which dialectics, whether it's materialist, idealist, speculative, the variations, Heraclitus, whomever it is, the way in which dialectics creates a very specific kind of universal, that this thing called photography, in its form that we're playing with it in the last couple of days, and in fact in the last couple of years, just breaks it down. And it doesn't break it down because photography has some sort of flag that it's coming through and going, yes, time to break down. It does it because it's able to. That's it. It's not a big secret. It can do it. Now why it can do it, when it can do it, how it can do it, these are all very fascinating things. But it can do it. And so the thing is how to then deal with that inconvenient fact that it does this. Whether we call it the history or we call it the political or this kind of thing. To me, this is why I've learned a lot at this conference, because, people have come in trying to say, well, here's what I think that does when you rethink epistemology. And here's what I think it does when you really look at how it affects your own art practice, Ben's work, for example. Here's how we're playing with this. Now, I think that there are things that are, let's say, universally true, but I don't think we have to pull in dialectics to make a universal claim. I want to say rape is bad. I have no position. I don't care if like a zillion people think it's really good for a religious practice. I don't like it. I think it's bad. I don't care who does it, and I want to say it's bad. So I want to go further than that. I want to say it's torture, and I think anybody that does it should be shot and killed and peeled away. So I have a very specific view on this. No emotion. Anyway, so my point is that when you think in these kind of terms, I mean, you say, all right, what happens when that level of passion really gets in there? To not have it in some way understood politically, this political scenario seems like it's a problem. And that's why I thought your thing around the latent begins to bring in, begins to sneak in the political, that I think that the worry by moving away from this thing called history is what the worry is what you, because Foucault, I don't know where Foucault says this thing about the a priori history. I'm obsessive about Foucault. I can't even think where he says
In
this.
the archaeology of knowledge.
He says that there's an a priori history.
Yeah, he has a sub-chapter called that, but I think he intends it as a paradox.
Yeah, because he certainly doesn't mean it as an ontological position.
He looked at what's the a priori means in writing an archaeology.
And then he says that it's history.
But he says clearly it's a paradoxical thing to say.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean,
No, go on.
but I mean, fundamentally, he is committed. Foucault was committed to an empirical work in the archive. I mean, this is what his debate with Derrida is about. This is why he comes out saying, no, we can get out of this way. We can, certainly. It's by doing rigorous, right, intellectual work in the archive. I mean, like, he does believe that you can get outside of your episteme. That's what his work is.
No, but I don't think he does it. I don't think he does it.
On the proviso that you understand the archive as Foucault wants you to understand it,
Yes, which is what?
which is not the place where the past is being archived or where the radical statements are being archived, but the place where subjectivity is exposed as constructed through the technology of the archive.
Or as someone said in their PhD.
It can be photography, but it doesn't have to be photography.
But as someone said in their PhD defense only a couple of days ago, the archive is where difference is made.
Yeah, but the word difference is preserved as the difference between the various statements or representations. So the archive archives the difference between the representations, and that's what creates the subject. So it's not the subject who approaches the archive to, let's say, recover their own history. And the subject is being constituted at the site of the archive, because the archive contains difference.
Okay, so we solved that. That's
Yeah.
I have a problem anyone ever attaching the word truth or reality to a photograph. As a practitioner, I think all photographs are constructed, whether they're taken or made, and I think that...
No, I just said the opposite.
But I
You disagree with me. It's good to hear.
I just think even like machines that are made for Google Earth,
Yeah.
you know, we make the machines, we select which images we think are important, we choose to see or share. There's an infinite number of images there, but it's a subjective choice of what it is we want to see, or what we believe is important, or what we isolate from all those fragments that are there. So it's our particular reality that we're looking for at that time. And it's a, I mean, I think the photograph is lots of many wonderful things, but I don't think, I mean, truth is always somehow people try to attach the word to it, or reality, and I just think that's...
So will you say that photography is precisely what shows us that there is no such thing as truth?
It's possible, yes. Yes. I mean, I
Is it
obviously don't come from a
also why
philosophical position.
I mentioned before that it becomes so relevant for philosophy in the last century or so, because it is actually exposing that philosophy had this problem already, and now it is even visually evident.
Yeah. Wait, I thought, yeah.
Just coming back on what Joe's just saying, coming back on John Rathman's work, exactly as you're saying, I mean, they are taken entirely by computer, they are selected by human, which is at this point in time, I think, key. And I can't help wondering how much longer that fleshing interface bit will actually carry on, because we're not really involved anymore, other than the fact that we're just going at the last minute and John Rathman or John Rathman's assistants are going, yeah, this is a really good one, look at this one with the cow's been in a traffic accident.
We can all look at that image and 10 different people can see 10 different things. So then if it is the truth or real, what is that reality? Because we come to it with all our own opinions and feelings and cultural environment kind of to view something and have a take on it.
Dan?
I just wonder how much we need to worry about the truth. I mean, it seems to be one of the things about photographs are, whether it's reality or not, they're real in their effects. It seems to me. The other thing is one of the things that photography does, or what the production of photographs does, is put an object which is between people. I mean, that's, you know, it becomes something which is a kind of means of kind of agreement or disagreement. It seems to me, you know, if you have an image of a particular situation, then it becomes something you place between people, and you have a debate. And you know, you may actually, you know, it's not whether or not in a sense, it doesn't matter whether the photograph is an objective record of reality. We can set that aside because we actually disagree about what reality is. You know, if we're looking, or if we're looking at a particular situation, we will literally see it differently. I mean, and I think that's, you know, so some say I'm kind of not so worried about this kind of whole truth thing.
But I wonder why people always pick up that word and attach it to photograph.
Well, like they do, but I think it's more in the discourse of photography than if you look at the practice of how people work with and talk about and use photographs. I think if you look at what people do with photographs, how they respond to photographs, it's patently obvious they don't accept it as true. I mean, just take take a very simple thing like a passport photograph. Well, how does one establish the truth of a passport photograph? Well, the first time you produce a passport photograph, you have to get someone to write on the back. Right? So it's the authority of that individual that guarantees the truth. So it's kind of the truth is there's something problematic about it. It's the truth of the image that we feel we need someone to, you know, usually have to get, you know, a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher to write on the back, because otherwise, you know, if it just happens to be your friend, it won't count as truth. So there's a kind of it's more complex, I think.
Is this thing working or not?
Well, you have to hold it closer. The battery might be.
I think that there are huge questions that we've raised, and as we keep saying, people approach them in their own way. But I'm uncomfortable with that idea, to be absolutely honest. I think that it opens up the problem of relativism of one kind or another. I won't go any further than that, but I want to say in relation to this history of photography that my view would be that we should perhaps, if we can't agree on whether there's a history and what it might signify, what it might mean, we can't really deny the issue of time in relation to a photograph. That's what I would find problematic if people were to say, I don't accept that there's any issue of time involved in the photographic image. The next set of questions that would come into play would be, how can photography be political? In what sense would photography be political? And these raises a huge issue about, well, what is the political and how is the political being played out in the context that we understand, which is basically post-European Enlightenment culture. And that has a lot of issues that need to be addressed. For example, how is it that a political community is established in terms of the tradition that we come out of? And if we look at the work of Hannah Arendt, for example, there is one way in which a political community is established, and it goes back to the ancient Greeks, and there's a concept of freedom that involved in that. Fundamentally, a political community is a community of free people to be creative, basically. And that's unfortunate from her point of view, from Hannah Arendt's point of view, from the European Enlightenment point of view, that the rest of the world has not been brought into this great experience of a political community. Therefore, the political question is, how do we bring the rest of the world into experience this idea of political community? Not acknowledging that maybe something more important is going on outside Europe anyway, that maybe they don't need us to tell them that. Maybe there is a way of life that is operating that is not really understood by the European tradition. Part of the European tradition obviously includes the Industrial Revolution that took place in the 19th century, out of which, at least in some readings, photography would be a prime, and cinema obviously would be a prime outcome. And so maybe if we could link up the ways in which cinema and photography in that context played a role or didn't play a role in the political, economic complex, then we might make some headway in trying to look once again at the link between the political and the photographic and so on.
Would you, Lynn want to say?
I will, and then it'll add other notes. And then maybe picking up on some of the other things. Sorry if this does initiate a turn. This is going to be slightly incoherent, but I'm just trying to pull, maybe not into a sentence, that's maybe too ambitious, some of the things that have really appealed to me and call on those speakers to elaborate a little bit more, namely the way in which there was a kind of sexual poetics in the question around latency and the question around exposure that Daniel was speaking of, the way in which Johnny was speaking, and I know I'm going to misremember this because it was complex but not a stream of consciousness, was to do with that coincidence, and I think there was something in there to do with force and self-touching. I'm kind of basically thinking about questions to do around affection and auto-affection and hetero-affection, which perhaps may bear on what Barb was saying about things being torn out of place and a question of force. And I draw on these because, well, A, I'm interested in these suggestions and provocations, but also because I was initially relieved and interested in the way in which we had an insistence on a photography that was out of the human hand in John's paper, and a kind of an importance in decentering the human. And then I actually started getting a bit worried that the human was being recalled in actually a very familiar and perhaps even a kind of Lacanian way of the human being constituted by the misrecognition of the image from without, and a negation of touching there. It is not touched by the human hand. So it was that not touching and the this exposure and the coincidence and the ripping out of context that were speaking to me.
Does anybody in the audience want to respond to that?
The German guys.
Anybody got manifesto?
We're going German now.
Yes.
I mean, while Mark is gearing up, I mean, I would just say that this notion of form and force is very important because it makes one rethink where does the human end, and it's not just at the end of your arm. It's, you know, just again, John and I were just talking about this before the break, or maybe it was during the break. You know, it's a way of challenging humanism without getting rid of the body, without getting rid of, you know, sexual, libidinal curiosities, and that they matter. They actually, not only do they matter, they make matter happen. They matter things. You know, they make things appear. And that, so the whole play between disappear, which was the Jean Nazi thing I stole from him, where you have a disjunction between a dis and an appearance. It's not really going into some black hole, it's just sort of doing that because it's got this sort of jelly thing going, or I don't, I'm trying to figure out how to say it best, but it wasn't so much it was heterosexual as that it was heterogeneic. So to me, it's actually quite queer. Whatever do we mean by this, you know, word queer now, without trying to like take the word to such a degree that it finally doesn't mean anything. But I mean it in this most radical, differencing, sexualized hunger, and that doesn't infuse, in fact, contagious, you know, whatever these words that we're using, it makes the art work, makes it work, and I think that's important. So what are you going to say, Mark?
I was going to say, I missed yesterday's, so I'm sure.
That's not going to prevent me.
No. To go back to the political, I was wondering where people think Marx would find the use value in photography.
Mark, can you just hold it straight?
Yeah, where Marx would find use value in Rand's question of photography. I think, sure, it's here in this room, but at the base, it's in the assembly plants, it's in the factories that at this moment churning out technology at a tremendous rate. It's in the workers or the technicians, the use value, and as that fades, as that hollows out, comes encoded, following Adorno here. I think that's then where we come in. But the real, the political, the use value would be, to keep it real. If the question is of the real, it's not a question that would eat me for too long. It lies somewhere else. I think there's more to this question of photography it's a very large question that I think it requires more thought.
Can I respond? Did you want to say something?
No.
Can I respond to Mark and also to John about the question of the ethical and but that was not a question. That was a manifesto. I just wanted to say something about the question of the political and the ethical, which kind of for brevity's sake we can put together. And the question is kind of where is the political in photography? Or why photography is political? So I think the first thing to say, photography is not political because it can represent events of inequality, for instance, or because it can gather, some kind of group of people around some kind of action. That's not what makes it political. What makes it political is, in politics, the most important question is what you take as your foundation. Where are you starting to move from? And with photography, the very basis is technology. And because photography always maintains the technology within the image, for that reason, it is possible to devise a kind of ethical position, which is photographic. It reminds me, for instance, Spinoza, who can write an ethics because it takes algebra as the basis of his method. Because algebra for him, according to his worldview, is the one thing you can be absolutely certain of. For that reason, algebraic approach to philosophy is ethical. And in photography, it is technology. It performs the same function.
If I look at it, it's the history of the technical object. It's not just something that arises, and you've got to work out, well, what does the technology basically do? What is it there for?
Technology makes a mark.
Why do we have technology? Well, one of the explanations that be given for technology is that technology makes a contribution to human survival. I mean, that's a very crude way of putting it. Or if you want to use Hannah Arendt's terms, it comes into play in relation to necessity. Or if you look at the history, prehistory of the human, Le Roi Goran, for example, how various instruments have been developed and how the human has evolved, or even Stigler's work, then we can see that there is some sort of connection between the human and a biological being of sorts. That is, the culmination of technology is Darwin, in a way. And that's the sort of thing, that's putting it very simplistically, but that's what I would challenge. That's what I think creates the political problem, because then the next step is bare life as a mode of governing. I know that's a very big leap, but that's basically how I see the relationship between technology. But whatever, you need to see a kind of history of the technical object, a la Simondon, for example. He's very good on that, and I think that is where we need to turn if we want to really get to grips with this issue.
I just want, Martin, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, well,
he has to get a train in about 1 minute. So,
yeah, I've heard.
So I wanted him to at least say something.
Well, I'm a little bit overwhelmed and I don't really know what to say. The only thing that came to my mind when you were speaking was that this is the script to Videodrome.
Yes. Thank you. That's good. I think that we're going to, yes? You're going to wrap up? I was going to wrap up, but you was going to say a sentence.
No, you please, I don't want to be a showstopper. It's just that
You're not a showstopper.
We're all going to re-look at Blow Up.
That's
for sure.
Exactly. No, I just want to make a quick comment which has been on my mind, because I was staring at the title of this conference, and my role at this whole thing has been to discuss titles. Do you mean the refrain or to refrain? And and I just became really curious about this concept, this word, the verge, on the verge of. I've been hearing for about 20 years that paper is dead, that print is dead. I don't know about you, but I've got an awful lot of print in my house, and I'm quite interested in this idea that that language of the verge suggests that there's either something about to disappear, or you're about to go over the edge. There's a kind of an anticipation, as you would describe it, a kind of almost like a libidinal moment in that word, on the verge of, rather on the verge of a breakthrough, or a complete failure, a disaster, something. And I was just wondering, I don't know really what the comment is, but just really really to wonder if who chose that title and what the thinking was there, and maybe there's this kind of, maybe that's a good way to sort of end. Maybe I suppose for me, I've just been sitting here thinking, why do we care? What is it that's so important? What's that, really big kind of anticipation all about, the verge of something new?
I think it's dead exciting. That's all I have to say. No, guess who came up with that? No, Daniel and I came up with the title together. We did. Right, Daniel?
Yes.
But do you think it's kind of like my print is dead thing?
No.
Print is not dead, nothing's going to change? Or do you really think
no.
you're on the verge of something different?
Yes.
And what is that?
Yes. I mean, the reason, Daniel and I, you want the real reason we came up with it, or you want, okay.
Always, Johnny, I always want the truth.
Here's the, see, you said there was no truth, but actually. So here's what it was. The first conference we had, which was a lot of fun and really interesting, we decided needed a more interesting title because it didn't quite have what we were trying to say. So we were going through things, and I was thinking, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and then you had come up with, well, what about, what's his name, who did the verge of philosophy? And we thought, that's interesting, because photography, philosophy, this could really work. So we started playing around with it and decided that that was going to be the title. Not because we think there's some utopian dawn that's happening now and everybody's going to go out into the sunset and go, yes, but because actually it's already going on. And the question is, do you get it? And how to get it? And let's get it, or let's not get it, or let's play around with it. Let's just cover ourselves in mud with it or something. That was the idea. And so to me, and I Daniel can say what he thinks, but to me it was a very playful title. It wasn't telling people, stop, go, do this, don't do that. It was really just let's start really thinking. Let's open this up to say something's going on and it's not pretty. And we've got to think about how it's working.
Well, and just to add to that, for the last kind of 20, 30 years since the digital came around, people are talking about the death of photography since Mitchell. And they say, photography is dead not only because now it's digital, but also because 3D is so much more interesting, and VR is a whole new world, and that's where kind of the image is at. And that was intended to say, well, actually, photography didn't even happen yet. It didn't even start. Yeah. It begins right now.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Originally was 3D. I mean, we're also going round in circles, and actually this is all just tools. Yeah. And they're tools that are evolving, and we're evolving, but it's the ideas that matter, and it's what we do with it that matters, and how we decide to create this thing. So,
and I think having the voice of the artist as the last word is the right thing to do. So let's thank everybody, and And also, anybody that participated in the conference will get a letter from me, and, asking if you don't mind giving us your papers so we can print them, publish them. And anybody who wants to make a comment on this and would like it part of the book, send them in. Anything you'd like to think about. Contribution, that's the word we want. Thank you.